This question asks us to look at each graph and decide if it's periodic or not. And then if it is periodic, we're supposed to find the period. So remember, when you're looking at these graphs, you're looking at the y values. If the y values are not repeating themselves, then it is not periodic. So let's take a look at A. Question A is not periodic. And the reason I can see this right away is if you look at these peaks, the y values are changing. So this first peak is at 1, the second peak is at 2, and then this one is at 3. So because those are not repeating themselves, even though it looks like it's kind of the same shape repeating itself, because the y values are changing, part A is not periodic. All right, now let's take a look at B. B is periodic, and I can see this because, first of all, it looks a whole lot like the sine graph, so that's kind of a dead giveaway. But I can also see that the y values are repeating themselves over and over again. If you put like barriers on the top and on the bottom, it keeps repeating itself and going back and forth to the same thing. So this one is periodic, and since it is, now I'm being asked to identify what the period is. So I always like to start at 0, and that's kind of my general starting point, and then I have to get back to the same x value, or I'm sorry, the same y value. So that, if I just do that little hump, that does get me back to the same x value, but then I see that if I copied and pasted it, it wouldn't match. So I have to go down, up again. So this right here would start at 0, and it would stop here at this x value, which is 2. So that would be the period of this graph. All right, let's talk about C. The graph for C is periodic, and I can see it for the same reasons as B. Even though it doesn't look like one of our sine or cosine graphs, I can see that if I kind of drew like a barrier on the top and a barrier on the bottom, that graph is constantly coming back to the same y values in a predictable pattern. So I'm going to say that C is periodic. And then again, we have to figure out what the period is. So let's start at 0. So here would be my starting point. And if I went all the way up and down, that looks like one full cycle, because now if I move that to the left or to the right, it looks like it would match up with the rest of the graph. So if I take a look, here was my 0, and I'm stopping right here, that looks like an x value of roughly 3. It looks like maybe a little tiny bit more than 3. So maybe we could say the period would be something like 3.1 or 3.2, but pretty close to that. So I'm going to say, we'll say approximately 3.2. Now let's take a look at the last part, which is part D. This one is not periodic, and the reason is because if I tried to draw in that barrier line to accommodate all of my y values, you'll see that the graph doesn't touch those green lines over and over again. It's not a predictable pattern. All of my y values are different. So this one is not periodic, which means we do not have to go about figuring out the period because it's not periodic.